going to jump back into Defeating Darwinism with chapter 1, and this is called Emilio's letter, the 3 common mistakes. And so what Dr. Johnson is going to do in this chapter is to break down the 3 ways Christians get confused and get sucked into believing in evolution, and why none of these 3 things are valid, and so how we have to guard our faith. The Lord says, take every thought captive. So be sure you're taking your thoughts captive, you're checking them against the Bible, what does the Word say, and you're checking them against reasoning. Is it logically possible to believe in 2 opposing things at the same time? So let's jump right in here. A student from a European university posted an email message on a public internet forum in order to explain how creationists and evolutionists can make peace. I've changed the spelling and grammar a bit to conform to standard American usage, but in substance, the message is just as this young man, who I will call Emilio, wrote. And here's the letter. I have been a Christian and a creationist all my life, fiercely against evolution until I started my biology course at the university and began learning about evolution. Guess what? I am still a creationist, and now I am also an evolutionist. It has become clear to me that the first chapter of Genesis is an allegory. If not, check how it states that there was morning and evening before the creation of the sun and moon, an impossibility. And once we accept that there is no reason why God could not have created all, there is in as many million years as you wish. If God created time and space, which we think of as the 4th dimension, then he is outside of it and therefore is not affected by it. Time has no meaning to God. Now, some of this is true. Time does have no meaning to God. He is in the past, the present, and the future all at the same time. I believe that God created the law of physics, and therefore everything that results from such laws is God's creation. To say that the species evolved does not deny God's act of creation, quite the opposite. Evolution is the science that studies how God created the species. Furthermore, evolutionism and creationism cannot be put in the same category, as one is of science, of the rational, and the other is of faith, the supernatural. I am a Christian, and it offends me to see that Christians are being viewed as lame brains, nice word usage, and just because some well-intended but ignorant brothers of mine try to discuss such matters without scientific knowledge. Please stop. You do more harm than good. Okay, and that's the end of the letter. Remember here, last week we talked about a lot of the 3 different views of evolution. There are 1, evolutionists, which as of 2019 composed about 20% of America's population. 2, there are Christians who believe that God created the world in actual 7 days. And I believe that was at 35 or 40%, I'd have to double check. And then there are Christians who believe that God created the world, but he used evolution. And they're trying to merge the 2. They're living in this lukewarm middle ground, thinking that that's the answer. And there's about 35 or 40% of people that believe in the middle ground. You can check out my introduction video if you want to see that chart again and hear me read the introduction. Okay, what does Mr. Johnson have to say about this? Emilio's statement brought a rueful smile to my face because I have heard the same reasoning so many times from American Christians and from agnostics who have figured out how to get Christians to adopt agnostic ways of thinking. What is an agnostic? An agnostic is someone who has decided that they are undecided about God, that maybe in fact it is impossible to determine if God is real or not, so they're not going to try to answer the question. They just know that it is a question, it is unanswerable, and they are not seeking the answer. Okay, of course, Emilio is doing his best to cope with a difficult situation, but he has committed the 3 basic mistakes that have done more than anything to disable Christians and other theists from talking sense about God to the world. What is a theist? And if you don't know, there are vocab terms in CC Connected's website that you can download for this book, which are very helpful. Okay, we need to define a theist and the opposite believer, which is a deist. A theist believes there is one God and that he takes an active role in our life. So he's the creator, he's the ruler, and he's actively ruling, and he intervenes supernaturally in the world today. A deist believes that there is a God, but he is not active in the universe. There's a big difference here because deism takes all the power out of Christianity, which is why evolutionists are okay if you believe in a deism reality, but they are not okay if you believe in a theistic reality. So when Emilio states this letter, he is reducing the power of God from being involved in the universe to simply the laws of science running the universe, which were created by God, but he is not active in intervening in the universe today. And so that is creating two different religious tracks here that he has divided down. Okay. Right now at the bottom of this paragraph, I think you should highlight 3 basic mistakes in green because that is breaking the chapter down into the sections it's going to be. And then underneath that starts with mistake number 1. It's only about length of time. So go ahead and highlight mistake number 1 in green. It's only about the length of time. You'll notice it's in bold. So this book does us the favor of partially outlining itself for us. So if you wanted to make an easy outline of this book, you could simply go through and write down each of the bold headings under each chapter, and that is a sufficient outline. Okay. First, Emilio has trivialized the conflict between evolution and creation, portraying it as merely a dispute over whether the word day in the book of Genesis can be interpreted figuratively rather than literally. His logic is that if the days of Genesis are really a poetic way of describing long geological ages, then evolution is merely God's chosen method of creating, and one can, without difficulty, be both an evolutionist and a creationist. How many of you have heard that before? I certainly have, and in my elementary school years, I thought that was a great way to merge these two conflicting ideas. However, I realized quickly in junior high that that was not going to suffice either for my faith nor for my science teacher. Like many mistakes, this one contains grains of truth. St. Augustine wrote many centuries ago that God is outside of time and the creator of time. And certainly God could use a gradual process of creation over millions of years if that is what he wanted to do. Or we are not denying his ability to do that. Emilio is right when we shouldn't refuse to consider genuine scientific possibilities just because we insist on reading Genesis more literally than perhaps its author intended. Unfortunately, this much too easy solution to the problem rests on a misunderstanding of what contemporary scientists mean by the word evolution. Okay, highlight the word evolution in blue. We're going to define this. If they meant only a gradual process of God-guided creation, then Emilio might be on the right track. A God-guided process is not what modern science educators mean by evolution, however. They are absolutely insistent that evolution, now highlight this next part in blue, here's your definition, is an unguided and mindless process, and that our existence is therefore a fluke rather than a planned outcome. For example, in the 1995 official position statement of the American National Association of Biology Teachers, hereafter NABT, accurately states the general understanding of major science organizations and educators. This is their definition of evolution. The diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution, an unsupervised, impersonal, unpredictable, and natural process of temporal descent with genetic modification that is affected by natural selection, chance, historical contingencies, and changing environments. That is what you are taught in public school. Or, in the words of the famous evolutionist George Gaylord Simpson, man is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind. I will explain in subsequent chapters why the biologist insists that evolution must be unsupervised and why God's purposes are not listed among the things that might have affected evolution. For now, I will just say that this claim is not one they can afford to abandon because their whole approach is founded on naturalism. Highlight the word naturalism in blue. which is the doctrine that nature is all there is. If nature is all there is, then nature had to have the ability to do its own creating. Darwinian evolution is a theory about how nature might have done this without assistance from a supernatural creator. That is why evolution in the Darwinian sense is by definition mindless and godless. Pretending otherwise is an evasion of the conflict, not a resolution of it. Yet many Christian theologians and educators take this evasive approach because they are hoping to find an easy way to avoid coming to grips with a very difficult problem. That's mistake number one. Emilio is kidding himself about what evolution means. It doesn't mean a God-guided gradual creation. It means an unguided, purposeless change. The Darwinian theory doesn't just say that God created slowly. It says that naturalistic evolution is the creator, and God had nothing to do with it. Okay, you can highlight that last paragraph that starts with "that's mistake number one" in yellow, because that is the main idea of mistake number one, okay? And I want to pause at this moment and just make sure everybody understands in this section of the chapter, what Dr. Johnson wants you to understand is that this argument is not innocent like we would like to believe it is. It is actually a theological argument where evolutionists are trying to remove God from the equation and prove, they are actually trying to use evolution to prove that God does not exist. Why does it matter if God really exists? Because it's the ultimate question. Are you going to submit your life to the Lord or not? And this is a loophole that evolutionists are trying to create so that they don't have to submit their life to the Lord and they don't have to feel guilty about it because God doesn't exist. So always remember, there's a lot more going on under the surface here. Okay, now I want to talk just a little bit more about this biology teacher statement because there's a little bit of strategy behind it. So flip with me to the appendix, page 120 in this book. Starting at page 120 in the back of the book, there are notes, and we have a note on this statement here. I'm going to skip the first paragraph. We're going to start in the second paragraph. In October 1997, partially in reaction to the publication of this book, the NABT, that's the biology teachers, amended its statement to delete the words unsupervised and impersonal. Dr. Eugene C. Scott, who advised the NABT to make the change, explained in a public statement that Berkeley lawyer Philip Johnson, author of Darwin on Trial, and other anti-evolutionists have claimed that the NABT statement is proof that evolution is inherently an ideological system rather than simply a well-supported scientific explanation. Remember, that's what we just talked about? This is not simply we want to believe in a God-guided evolution. This is its own religion eliminating God from the equation. Dr. Scott also noted that the statement still affirmed that evolution is a natural process and that natural selection has no specific direction or goal. God always has a specific direction and goal, so they are still eliminating God from this. The complete story of why the NABT statement was amended is too long for inclusion here, but it is more fully explained in an essay in my book, Objections Sustained, so you can check that out. The verbal change does not mean that the NABT or the evolutionary science in general has made a substantive change in its position. Rather, the words were removed for tactical reasons because they made the exclusion of God too explicit and hence were drawing unwanted attention to the huge philosophical component in Darwinian evolution. The NABT statement still provides that evolution involves only natural, which is unintelligent and purposeless, factors, specifically natural selection, natural chance, historical contingencies, and changing environments. As I have often explained, see page 101 of this book, the most astute scientific naturalists do not say that claims involving God are false. They prefer to dismiss such assertions more effectively by classifying them as religious, which means that they are incapable of being either true or false. That's their best way to avoid the truth of this argument. In this spirit, the NABT statement says that evolutionary theory, indeed all of science, is necessarily silent on religion and neither refutes nor supports the existence of a deity or deities. This disclaimer places the God of the Bible along with the pagan deities of Mount Olympus into a category to which rational standards, logic, of evaluation do not apply. Evolutionary science will allow God to exist, but it will not allow him to leave evidence of his existence in the realm accessible to science. And we're talking here about theism versus deism. You're allowed to believe that there is a God. You're just not allowed to believe that he is alive and active today. He has standards, that there is an actual right and wrong, and that you will be held accountable for your actions and your sins someday. Therefore, forcing you to make the choice of submitting your life to Christ or not. That is where the argument lies. Now, let's flip back over to chapter 1. Okay. Now that we have summarized the first mistake, which is downplaying the significance of this argument and the subtleties of what's going on behind the scene, let me ask you a question. Why do you think evolutionists want to downplay this? Why would it be to their advantage? That'd be a great question for you to think through and discuss with your director and with your parents. We're going to move on to mistake number 2. God made the laws and then retired. And I'd like you to highlight that in green. In fact, at the right above it, I even wrote page 120 so that I remembered there's more information on the topic back there. Okay, mistake number 2. What I have said so far is fairly well known because the scientific authorities have spelled it out again and again. I suspect Emilio understands this at some level because he also proposes a different way of reconciling evolution and creation and thus makes his second mistake. Even if evolution itself was mindless, God could still be the author of the ultimate laws of nature by which evolution operates. Thus, we have Emilio's second attempt. God made the laws of physics and chemistry, and evolution follows those laws. Therefore, God is ultimately the creator of everything, even if evolution was, as the Darwinists say, unsupervised and purposeless. The notion that God is a remote first clause who establishes the scientific laws and thereafter leaves nature to its own devices is called deism. Deism is different from theism, which implies a God who takes an active supervisory role in the world, like the God of the Bible. When Darwinists say that their theory does not deny the existence of God, they claim that they are saying nothing about religion. They usually mean that they are willing to allow deism as a possibility for people who are unwilling to give up God altogether. Many evolutionary naturalists see no harm in making this concession, because a God who confines his activity to the ultimate beginning of time is unimportant to human lives. I want you to understand, if you choose this route as a Christian, this destroys your testimony. Who wants to serve a God like this? A meaningless God that is not interested in you personally and takes no active interest in your life. It takes all the power away from God. The important question is not whether God exists. It is whether God cares about us and whether we need to care about God's purposes. Deism answers no to these questions. For that reason, even George Gaylord Simpson found deism to be perfectly consistent with his Darwinian doctrine that our true creator is a purposeless material system. Now you can highlight this next paragraph yellow because it's going to summarize. So that's mistake number 2. Emilio is willing to exchange the creator God of the Bible for the lifeless first cause of deism. It's like trading real gold for counterfeit money. Okay, the important thing to remember in this second mistake is that there is a difference between deism and theism. And the ultimate goal here is still, once again, for the evolutionists to deny the truth that there is a God, there are absolute rules, and there will be a reckoning for how you have lived. They're trying to evade that so that they don't have to follow God's laws. They don't have to make the choice of submitting their life to Christ or not. And so by saying that God is this castle in a cloud, takes away the power and the authority that he holds as creator of the universe. Okay, now highlight the next title, green, mistake number 3, giving away the realm of reason. Now we're getting into our logic side of the argument. That deism isn't Christianity is pretty well known also. And again, Emilio seems to have some awareness of this. So he makes a third attempt, and in the process rediscovers an error that many prominent theologians and philosophers have made before him. The Bible says that in the beginning God created, and in the beginning was the Word. Word is Jesus. The kind of science Emilio is worried about says that in the beginning were the particles, and creation required no pre-existing mind or purpose. One account starts with God, the other with matter. They seem absolutely opposed to each other. But could it be that the opposition is only apparent, the result of comparing unlike things as if they were similar? Consider this example. An artist says, the Grand Canyon is sublimely beautiful. The scientist says, it's a big old hole in the ground. These statements may seem contradictory on a superficial reading, but of course they are both perfectly true. The Grand Canyon is a big old hole in the ground. It's also sublimely beautiful. The superficial contradiction disappears when we understand that an artistic statement about beauty deals with a different realm from a purely descriptive statement about the bare facts that the Grand Canyon is old and deep. Maybe we can compare these. The same thing is true about apparent contradictions between the religious and scientific statement. Maybe the statement, in the beginning God created, is like the artistic statement about the Grand Canyon. It's how we perceive the meaning and beauty of the world. Maybe the scientific claims about mutation and natural selection are like the statement that the Grand Canyon is a big old hole in the ground. They are about bare physical facts, and hence they do not really contradict the higher level statements about meaning, purpose, beauty, and God. In that case, the scientific facts do not matter, whatever they are. Emilio can proclaim with a relish a complete naturalism in science and insist that it makes no difference to faith. He might explain his position in words like these. Yes, the diversity and complexity of life are the result of evolution. Yes, evolution is a blind, unsupervised, and unintelligent process. Yes, we humans are the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have us in mind. Isn't it wonderful that science and reason has discovered all this knowledge? Of course, none of this scientific knowledge contradicts my religious belief that God is our maker, because science is known to us by reason, and religion is a matter of faith. The faith versus reason and belief versus knowledge, that's just a rewording, mistake is very seldom stated that clearly. Clear, simple statements tend to arouse our common sense. Okay, remember, we're going to use logic to think through these arguments. The common sense tells us that Emilio is trying to ride two horses that are going in opposite directions. Rather, this third mistake thrives in the obscurity provided by big words and lengthy academic books. The third mistake is not as simple as the first two. It is a sophisticated mistake, and hence it has an irresistible attraction to intellectuals who are looking for a way to convince themselves that there is no need to deal with the conflict between theism and scientific naturalism. Fortunately, Emilio states the mistake artlessly, so we can more easily understand what is wrong with it. Exactly what is wrong with the idea that religious statements belong to the realm of faith, while scientific statements to the realm of reason? I recommend you highlight that question in green. It's a very important question that you might want to come back and reference, and the answer is going to be right below it. Let's consider how Emilio's professors and fellow students understand this distinction. They know that people believe in all kinds of things: astrology, spirit guides that communicate with dead people, space aliens that kidnap humans for bizarre scientific experiments, and the God of the Bible. From a scientific naturalist point of view, all such beliefs are about equally irrational. Any of them can be justified by an appeal to faith. Against such an appeal, rational argument and evidence are helpless because you cannot rationalize faith. Here is a familiar example. Some small children believe that Santa Claus brings the presents they receive at Christmas. They believe it on authority, Mom and Dad told me. And because it is a satisfying myth, one that makes them think they are loved by some great being beyond their family experience. Then one day, a child hears from a slightly older friend that Santa is not real. At first, she regards this as an unholy lie. But the friend talks our little girl into performing a scientific investigation. She keeps herself awake after bedtime somehow and tiptoes to the top of the stairs to watch her parents putting the presents into the Christmas stockings. What will she believe? If she says that reason tells her one thing and faith tells her another, we expect her to choose reason as she grows up, right? Even in this example, you eventually get to a place where you have to choose. If she continues to believe in Santa as the years go by, she is refusing to come to terms with reality. We may treat her with kindness and even think she is cute, but we will not take her seriously. If she goes on believing in Santa as an adult, we will conclude that she is insane. Do you see how this is the same way with Christians? If you go on saying, yes, I believe in evolution, yes, I believe in God, and they have nothing to do with each other, it completely discredits and destroys your witness. Because either you believe in the active God who is the ruler of this universe and will be the judger of it at the end of days, or you don't. And live your life one way or the other. The Bible says, be hot or cold, but if you're lukewarm, I will spew you out of my mouth. Is the God of the Bible, or the Jesus who rose from the dead, an adult version of Santa Claus? One can defend a myth of that kind by saying that it gives people comfort or allows them to think that death is not the end of everything. The myth may even be socially useful, provided it is kept within bounds. Even atheists sometimes worry about the moral consequences for society if religion disappears altogether. These are reasons for treating the story with a certain patronizing respect and for allowing believers to keep their illusions if they must. To summarize what they just said, evolutionists will condescendingly allow Christians to keep their beliefs in a God because it gives a certain sense of order and organization. There are rules to live by, which keeps society in good standing. So long as they don't come over and tell the evolutionists that what they are saying and believing is wrong and that there is ultimate accountability and rules that the evolutionists don't want to live by. So we like it when it plays to our benefit and keeps people from murdering and killing. We don't like it when we say you have to submit your will and desires to Christ and it affects their life personally. Christian theists can buy the tolerance of most agnostics if they retreat to the faith escape. The price is that they tactily agree not to dispute the naturalistic doctrine that God, like Santa Claus and Zeus, is a product of human culture. In consequence, for intellectual purposes, Christianity ranks among what some call the higher superstitions, meaning the kind of irrational belief that are relatively respectable in polite society. We all tolerate Christianity because it helps bring a little bit of order and a couple of friendly rules, and it's an easy way to manipulate people into being kind to others, and so we put up with it. Christian beliefs are studied in religious study programs alongside primitive myths as subjective belief systems that are not based on scientific knowledge. So that's mistake number 3. I said it was a sophisticated mistake, and one can argue that it is not so much a mistake as a rational defense system born of desperation. Now, I highlighted that, rational defense strategy born of desperation. I think that's a very insightful description of what is happening here. In fact, I wouldn't blame Emilio if he were to break into the conversation at this point and reply in these words. So let's pretend like Emilio is saying this. What exactly is it that you want me to do? As a boy, I was taught to believe in a literal Genesis story that contradicts modern science at just about every point. I can't defend that story now that I'm in the university. I'd be buried under a mountain of evidence coming from experts who know far more about every subject than I do. I wouldn't have confidence in my own argument, and I'd be labeled a crank. My career in science would be over before I even got started, unless I'm just going to give up and become an agnostic, like most of the other students. I don't see what else I can do but rely on these defensive measures you call mistakes. Okay, so this is summarizing the third mistake here. Here's the deal, and what you have to understand is there really is a sophisticated argument of is God real and do we have to obey him going on underneath this discussion of evolution. It is just the most recent and the most sophisticated manner of eluding obeying and submitting your life to Christ. That is the motivation behind it. And we're going to dive into that throughout the rest of the book. Okay, we are going to start the last section. It is called, Do You Have a Better Idea? And I recommend you highlight that in green. In this conclusion of chapter 1, the author is going to outline the next half of his book, okay? And so I'm going to point that out as we go through. It's the right question to ask, and the answer is that I do. The rest of this book will be devoted to explaining that idea. Here, for a start, is what Emilio has to do if he is to master the challenge of evolution instead of having it master him. First, highlight the word first, green. Next to it, I recommend you write chapters 2 and 3. What he discusses in this first section, he's going to dive in depth in chapters 2 and 3. First, Emilio has to stop seeing this issue as a conflict between the Bible and science, in which the supposed problem is to decide between two complete stories and to believe uncritically in one or the other. This is the third mistake we're trying to remedy here. As we shall see, evolutionary naturalists rely on a cultural stereotype to shut off all criticism of their philosophy. The stereotype portrays all opponents as extreme Genesis literalists who reject the evidence of science for purely religious reasons. As long as the conflict is perceived this way, the grave scientific defects in the ruling theory and the philosophical bias that sustains it can be effectively concealed from view. Okay? Second, highlight that green, and I recommend you write chapter 4. That's where he's going to dive in deep here. Emilio needs to focus above all on what I call the blind watchmaker thesis. You might highlight that. That's a term that's going to come up over and over again. This is the Darwinian claim that God was not necessary for biological creation because the impersonal material forces of genetic mutation and natural selection can and did produce all the fantastic complexity of living organisms. The scientific evidence is strongly against the blind watchmaker's thesis, and therefore strongly against the NABT's claim that a purposeless material process is our true creator. And third, highlight third in green and write chapter 4 next to this. Same chapter is going to dive into this one. Third, Emilio has to learn that science, as defined in our culture, has a philosophical bias that needs to be exposed. We're talking about the underlying religion, okay? On the one hand, science is empirical. This means that scientists rely on experiments, observations, and calculations to develop theories and test them. On the other hand, contemporary science is naturalistic and materialistic in philosophy. Anything that comes back to philosophy is religion. So naturalism is a religion just like Christianity. What this means is that materialist explanations for all phenomena are assumed to exist. Assumed. Let's come back to those words. And what that means is that the NABT's definition of evolution as an unsupervised process is simply true by definition, regardless of the evidence. That sounds a lot like faith to me. It is a waste of time to argue about the evidence if one side has already won the argument by defining the terms. I'll explain all these points in detail in subsequent chapters. First, I should explain why it is so important, not only for Christians, but for everyone who loves the truth and wants to see it prevail, to understand how to deal rationally with the tyranny of Darwinism. I'll use U.S. culture as a case in point. Though the situation takes a different form in other societies, similar errors in thinking are widespread, as Emilio's letter makes clear. The United States of America at the beginning of the 21st century is in a most peculiar situation. This country is the world leader both in science and in setting cultural trends, but it is unusual among industrialized nations in its refusal to abandon the concept that God is our creator. Most Americans say they believe in God, and many of them really seem to mean it. Opinion polls indicate that no more than about 1 out of 10 Americans accepts evolution in the NABT sense. That is now 2 out of 10. As a purposeless material system that accounts for all of life's history. Of the approximately 90% who attribute our existence to God, almost half are creationists, in the sense that they reject an evolutionary explanation of human origins altogether. Now it's 80%, and about half are creationists. It's about 40%. The other half are like Emilio. They mistakenly think they have resolved the problem by viewing evolution as a God-guided system of gradual creation. Although most Americans believe in a creator, the intellectual culture is totally dominated by naturalism. Even in many colleges and seminaries that are formerly religious, that God is an invention of human culture is taken for granted, not only in the natural sciences, but throughout the many departments of our universities, including religious studies departments. Many theologians and leaders of mainstream Christian denominations accept this situation or even endorse it, denouncing creationists for being ignorant troublemakers, as Emilio is learning to do. And essentially, in that situation, they are watering down their faith by taking the power that God has and hiding it or denying it. In short, the intellectual elite in America believe that God is dead. In consequence, they think that reason starts with the assumption that nature is all there is, and that a mindless evolutionary process absolutely must be our true creator. The common people aren't so sure of that, and some of them are very sure that God is alive. I agree with the common people. If we are right, the consequences are very, very important. The ruling naturalists know that too, although they may deny it. That is why they are so determined to define words like evolution and science in such a way that naturalism is true by definition. That is unfair. I therefore put the following simple proposition on the table for discussion. God is our true creator. I am not speaking of a God who is known only by faith and is invisible to reason, or who acted undetectably behind some naturalistic evolutionary process that was to all appearances mindless and purposeless. The kind of talk is about the human imagination, not the reality of God. I speak of a God who acted openly and who left his fingerprints all over the evidence. Does such a God really exist, or is he a fantasy like Santa Claus? Highlight that question green. That is the subject of this book. And that is the question that Dr. Johnson will seek to answer in the next three chapters. So chapters 2, 3, and 4 are going to dive into all three of these errors and go in way more depth. And it's going to lay out that naturalism is a religion based upon faith, just like Christianity. Okay, I hope this helped you process what you're reading here and enjoy your discussion in class. Have a great week.